One of the most impressive things that Tesla announced about the new Cybertruck at its delivery event is that it has steer-by-wire, but many of us don't have a very good idea of what steer-by-wire means versus traditional steering, so I figured I would do a video on the differences between traditional steering and steer-by-wire and why Tesla would want to do steer-by-wire, and also why it has not been done in a large-scale production-ramped vehicle ever before. Let's take a look. Hey y'all, it's Dr. Know-It-All. So if you drive a car or kind of any other vehicle aside from maybe a bicycle or something like that, you have probably experienced the joys of steering a vehicle before, right? So you turn a wheel inside the car or inside the golf cart or whatever it is, and the wheels in the front of the vehicle turn, and that allows you to direct where the car is going. Almost certainly that would be with a conventional steering system or a mechanical linkage. And so what I did was I brought up this nice little image here that sort of shows the difference between that and steer-by-wire, just to give a good sense of this, and then we're going to talk in a little more detail over the course of this video. So anyway, traditional steering, you've got your steering wheel inside the cab of the vehicle that you're driving, like I said, a golf cart, car, whatever it is. Then you have a column shaft that goes all the way down to near where the front wheels are for your vehicle, and then you have what's called a rack and pinion steering system, and pretty much the rack is just a bunch of teeth in a long arm that you can see right here, and the pinion is just something that as you turn the wheel, there are actually teeth that engage these teeth along this long linear arm, and that causes these steering arms to pull back and forth, right? So they move back and forth, and that then pulls the tires and the wheels in either direction as you are steering. So if you steer to the right, in other words, clockwise, it will pull it this direction, which will make the wheels turn in a right-hand direction and make you go right. If you do the opposite, it does the opposite. So that is traditional steering. It's fairly basic, and it's been around a very, very long time, of course. You know, it's like the kind of thing that they invented about 100 years ago or so. They had a little more complicated ways of doing it, and originally they actually had some levers and things like that that you would pull to kind of apply brakes to each wheel to cause them to steer in different directions. But you know, once they came up with this basic methodology, it's been the same for a very, very long time. The huge advantage of it is it's completely simple mechanically, and it works very, very well, and you can apply a lot of torque to the vehicle, especially if you put a power steering unit in between this column and the actual rack and pinion steering system, so that you can give a boost to the steering at low speeds. If you've ever either driven a car that doesn't have power steering, or you had an older car, or you had power steering go out on you ever, you know that at low speeds it can be very difficult to turn these things because the car is very heavy and there's a lot of friction on the wheels. So having a power steering unit in here is very, very beneficial, and almost all modern cars have that kind of a thing. So moving from that to a steering system that is steer-by-wire, what you're doing is you're turning the wheel in the cab of the vehicle, but there's no direct connection between the wheel and the actual rack and pinion system, or whatever you use. As it turns out, Tesla is not even using a rack and pinion system, but basically you've got a disconnect. There is no longer this mechanical linkage, this long big shaft. And of course, if you think about this system, one obvious safety issue that comes up is that this giant column here is basically a spear that's pointing towards your chest as you're driving the vehicle. So if there was a front end collision and this thing collapsed, it can go right through you. So it's very, very dangerous. So in modern cars, of course, they have mitigating things to make sure that that doesn't happen. Many people got impaled, back in the day, until they figured out that this was a bad idea to have a gigantic, metal rod that's pointing straight at you as you're driving. But even with that, these things are still very, very dangerous. Having these long metal rods that in an accident can basically function as a spear, like I said, is extremely dangerous. So one big advantage of steer-by-wire, of course, is safety. If you do get involved in a front-end collision, there's really not a lot that is there to kind of compress and go into your body, so that's a much safer situation. And of course, there are other advantages we'll talk about in just a second, but first, let's get back to this. So basically, the steering wheel here now has what's called an angle sensor. It basically just, figures out how far you've turned the wheel, and then there is a DC motor that's connected to the wheel to give you force feedback. So if you're turning, it gives you some resistance so that you don't just, spin the thing without any resistance, and you don't know that you're actually applying some torque to the wheel. So that motor is there only for feedback for the human. It's not really necessary. You don't even really need that force feedback, but of course humans are used to it as you're making a turn, having some resistance as you're doing the turn. So we're used to that, so you have to have some sort of a motor there just for humans to actually understand what's going on. And then on the other end where the wheels are, there is another DC motor and another angle sensor. And so that DC motor actually is a very high horsepower DC motor that can turn the rack and pinion system or actuators or whatever it is, even at very low speeds. And then there's an angle sensor, of course, and that angle sensor is related to, if it's a one-to-one situation, which again, one of the advantages of steer-by-wire is it doesn't have to be that, but if it was a one-to-one situation, if you turn this 10 degrees clockwise, this would go 10 degrees clockwise and you would get exactly what you expect out of the steering. So again, the big advantage here is that there is no mechanical linkage between these two, and that frees you up on several fronts, not just on a safety front, but on several other fronts. And if you want to enjoy some geeky reading here, there is a steer-by-wire control system paper by Adam Cater from May of 2006, and you can read through this if you're interested, but we can look at a couple of quick pictures here. If you want to get into more detail about how steer-by-wire works, it uses PIC microcontrollers. Again, it doesn't have to, but this was at the time. There are steering actuators, there's motor feedback in the steering system. So this is just more of a schematic diagram of exactly how this works, and I love the fact that he uses MATLAB here as the simulator to show how all of this stuff works. And then if we turn to Wikipedia, we can see some of the previous vehicles that have been produced with steer-by-wire. They are not mass-produced vehicles, but the Nissan Infiniti Q50 in 2013 used it, and there were some other things, but notice that they had a traditional steering column that was connected by a clutch. So basically, if the system failed, I think what would happen is the mechanical system would actually engage, and you would have a mechanical backup of the whole thing. So a little bit more interesting and cooler, but it also still had all of the traditional parts. So it was a little bit like a hybrid gas-electric vehicle. It had kind of the worst of both worlds, but it didn't have the best of either. So you really don't want to have a mechanical backup. You want to have other types of backups. And of course, believe me, you need backups because you can't have this thing fail ever. If you can't steer a car and it's going 50 miles an hour, it's just, it's like a missile at that point. You have no idea where it's going to go, and it would be very, very tragic. So you obviously need the steer-by-wire system to never fail, and even though Tesla didn't get into exactly how they did it, when I spoke to the person in the factory, he made it very, very clear to me that they have multiple backups. Like, I think a dual completely redundant system, and then a third backup that's sort of an extra thing on top of that. Probably means it has its own sort of backup power supply or something along those lines, so that it can operate at least for a short period of time without needing access to the 48-volt battery, the low voltage battery, or the high voltage systems or anything like that. So whatever it is, it sounds like they've got at least dual redundancy and probably triple redundancy for the steer-by-wire system. Otherwise, it's unlikely that NHTSA would have ever given them permission to install this in a production vehicle. And so now let's turn to a shot that I got from the factory tour itself, and I'm going to be breaking down the whole factory tour over time. Just a little bit early to do that yet, but I thought this was interesting enough to call out here. So here you can see the column that goes out in front of the wheels. So this actually will pull the wheels around, right? So it will pull them like this to turn it. And connected to that is an actuator in here. So this is basically a linear actuator. This thing spins and it forces this rod to go, this direction, and both of them. On the opposite end, of course, you have the other direction of this. And so you're able to pull the wheels to the left, pull the wheels to the right, using the same motors, apparently. This is something that Scott and Hans and I have theorized, is that these are the same parts. So you've got this, it's flipped 180 degrees from this one, so the left and the right are the same part. So you don't have to have two parts for the left and the right of the vehicle, you just have to have one, and you just flip it 180 degrees so that one of them goes one direction at the same time and the other one goes the other way, and so it pulls it back and forth in the same direction. But anyway, you can see that this is a very compact unit, and again, does not have the traditional steering column that is there that connects it to the wheel. So this makes it a much more elegant solution to the problem of having to steer a very, very large vehicle like a truck. And according to what we know, these motors actually put out about 5 horsepower. They're very, very powerful motors. They're able to turn these wheels. So again, remember, this is almost a 7,000 pound vehicle. And so turning it at a dead standstill, like it's just sitting there, there's a huge amount of friction on the wheels at that point. They're sitting on the ground. So in order to rotate them against that friction against the ground, you need a ton of force. And that's where these very high output actuators would come in. They're able to apply a great deal of force to turn the vehicle. And here we have a steer-by-wire diagram from Bosch Mobility. So you can see this is all sort of packaged up. There's this, a wireless connection, actually wired connection, but non-physical connection. So there would be a physical wire or multiple ones going from the steering column to the turning column area. But that doesn't have a mechanical linkage anymore, and there's an actuator in the steering column. Here you can see that there's only one. Looks like in the Cybertruck there's actually two of them, but in this case at least there's only one actuator that turns both of these at the same time. And then we can turn to this nice blog from BSM North America. And by the way, I'll put links to all of these things in the description so you can look at them on your own time. But the advantages of steer-by-wire systems: number one, simple and efficient vehicle architecture. It reduces the complexity of the architecture. You don't have to have these long columns. You don't have to have linkages. And remember, you still have to have some sort of power steering assist system anyway, some sort of motor-driven hydraulic system. So having an actuator there instead is not really adding a lot of complexity, and it's stripping away a bunch of the mechanical complexity. And of course, something that makes Tesla always happy is you can see vehicle manufacturers can also benefit from having more flexibility with engine compartments and interior design, as mechanical steering parts require more space and areas for installation than electric wiring systems. So Tesla is all about reducing parts, reducing the need to have volume taken up in the vehicle itself. So that's a big advantage. Makes it simpler, makes it more efficient, makes it generally better in that sense. And then we get more flexibility from steer-by-wire. As they say, because there is no longer a direct mechanical link to the road, bumps, vibration, and noises won't transmit to the operator unless the vehicle manufacturer wants it to do it in software, providing a more comfortable, less distracting operational experience. No steering column also increases flexibility for interior design. And then we get to improved fuel efficiency. So you don't think about this, but that actually is an advantage as well. So the study that they cite here said that they found that electro-hydraulic steering technology was able to reduce fuel consumption by nearly 15%. So that is a really, really big improvement. Now, of course, that's fuel consumption. We're looking at an electric vehicle, but whatever. You're going to get more range out of the vehicle by not having all this mechanical stuff in the vehicle, and of course, all of the inefficiencies of the mechanical system. And then we get to refined safety features, and you see down at the bottom here that says the removal of a steering shaft entirely can reduce the risk of operator injury, so that we've already talked about. But also, this is the big advantage for the Cybertruck. Steer-by-wire systems feature parametric steering capabilities, which provide the operator with the control to alter steering reaction based on speed and current operating conditions. So parametric steering capability just means it's proportional. So if you're going very, very slowly, if you turn the wheel like 90 degrees or something like that, so you turn the steering wheel in the vehicle, that can turn the vehicle's wheels like all the way around. So it can make the tires rotate completely around, only turning the steering wheel maybe a quarter of a turn or a half of a turn. And then as you ramp up speed, you get less and less of that. So as you turn more on the highway, there's only a very small amount of variation in the wheel as you're going at speed. And of course, Tesla's engineers then would have to create software that translates between the steering wheel and the actual steering of the vehicle, and they have to create it in a way that feels comfortable and natural. Of course, that's something that's an engineering challenge to do that right, but obviously Tesla has some very talented engineers, so they can do that. But the really, really big advantage you have here, and one of the complaints everybody had about the yoke in the Model S and the Model X, is that if you're trying to do a maneuver where you have to turn the wheel multiple times, you lose track of it because the steering wheel is no longer a wheel, it's more of a rectangle and a yoke shape, so that you lose it as you're going hand over hand. With the Cybertruck, you never have to go more than upside down, so you never have to rotate it to the point where you can't hold on to it without having to go hand over hand. So the really big advantage of steer-by-wire for the user is that you have that proportional steering control, which means at low speeds, a small amount of turn from the steering wheel equals a very large amount of turn in the wheels themselves. And of course, an added bonus is the rear wheels can steer as well, because you can do the same thing in the rear. If you had to have a mechanical linkage from the front to the back, that would get really, really complicated. You'd have to be running, pieces, shafts and things like that down back through the bed and all sorts of crazy things. So it would make four-wheel steering almost impossible in a vehicle to do it mechanically. Yeah, you can do it, but it's a huge giant pain in the butt. It would be very prohibitive to do that in a mass market vehicle. So Tesla, by going with steer-by-wire, has enabled not only really cool front steering with proportional steering with the steering wheel, but also allowed rear wheel steering as well, which allows the vehicle to make very, very tight turns, even though it's a very large vehicle. So that's going to make owning the vehicle feel much, much better. It's going to feel much more like a car when you're driving around in a parking lot or something, and not like a giant truck where you have to do all sorts of, very careful maneuvers because it has no tight turning radius. And of course, again, the big downside of this is you could have an electrical failure, which could cause you to lose control of the vehicle. So obviously, Tesla and the regulatory bodies have ensured that this can't happen. If it makes you feel any better, throttle by wire, which is basically you pressing the accelerator of your gas car or your electric vehicle, has been throttle by wire for a long time. Like, nobody has mechanical gas pedals anymore. They're all throttle by wire. Now, you could argue that that's not as safety critical, because if you push down and it doesn't go, at least the car is not, you can still steer it so you can get out of the way. So steering by wire has come late, but these other systems have been in place for a very long time. They're very, very safe, and people utilize them, for billions of miles, and we don't have problems with them. So it's not a really big step to go from there to steer by wire, and I'm sure that it is going to be a very safe system. And finally, let's speculate a little bit on the actuator. So you can see that this is a Tesla Bot linear actuator here. This is something that Tesla has been designing to go into the Tesla Bot to operate the humanoid robot. And this is exactly the kind of actuator that we could be seeing in the vehicle itself. So if you look right here, this whole area could be this linear actuator in here. And then you just have a post that's sticking out that allows the wheel, and the shock tower and everything else to rotate around. So this could be the Optimus linear actuator, or a very, very close sibling of it. And that would allow Tesla to have massive economies of scale if they're utilizing this same actuator in their humanoid robot and in their vehicles. That would mean that they could build tens or hundreds of thousands of these linear actuators and not have to build multiple models. So this is totally speculation. This was actually something that Scott Walter suggested first, and I was like, oh, that's a brilliant idea. But it does look like this is the kind of, housing and approximately the right size for the Tesla Bot leg. And so we could either be seeing an identical or a very similar actuator in the vehicle itself that Tesla might be building. Now, they could be buying this from a third party, but Tesla did say that they're attempting to build as much of this as possible in-house. So my guess would be that they're building the actuators themselves. And just in case you think the Optimus linear actuators are not strong enough to turn a vehicle, well, you can see one of the linear actuators here in a video that Tesla did lifting a grand piano. And in fact, there's actually a shot of a guy actually playing the grand piano while the actuator is lifting the thing off the ground. So these are very, very strong actuators. They're plenty strong to rotate the tires of a vehicle while it's sitting still, even a very heavy vehicle like the Cybertruck. And as a final longer-term advantage, Tesla actually has the ability to use this steer-by-wire in their eventual robotaxis or driverless vehicles. So one of the major challenges of going from a driver type of vehicle with full self-driving, where the person is still in charge, there's a steering wheel, there's an accelerator pedal, and all of that kind of stuff, to the more sleek, futuristic robotaxi look, where you don't have a steering wheel, you don't have accelerator, brake, all of that stuff, is that you have to get to a steer-by-wire type of system, since obviously you don't have a steering wheel anymore, you only have the drive system. And so in the Cybertruck and in doing steer-by-wire, Tesla is actually creating the technology that they need for the eventual next generation vehicle, which will be able to become the robotaxi. And so that's something where you're seeing Tesla playing a long game and working on the technology in this vehicle that they're definitely going to need in the next generation vehicle in order to allow the robotaxi to happen. So clever stuff that Tesla's working on there. So there you have it. Tesla has done what many people thought was going to be impossible. They've actually got steer-by-wire in a truck, in a mass production vehicle, and they've gotten permission to use it. They've got the redundancies. They've got actuators that are strong enough to turn the wheels even when the truck is sitting still, and that gives them huge advantages in parts reductions, the ability to steer with the back of the vehicle as well as the front, the rear tires, and the ability to have proportional steering so that at low speeds, a small amount of turn turn of the steering wheel turns the wheels a very large extent. So this is really, really exciting news. It's one of the most important features in the Cybertruck, and I'll be really excited to see what people think about it as they drive the Cybertruck around town and get more experience with it. All right, I hope you enjoyed this video and found it fun and interesting and thought-provoking. If you did, please do like it so other people can find it, and of course consider subscribing for more of this kind of content. As always, a huge shout out to my patrons on Patreon, my YouTube channel members, and of course my ex-subscribers. Thank you all so much for supporting the channel in any way that you can, and of course if you want to join any of the teams, just check out the links in the description. And if you're interested in a whole bunch of really cool merch, check out our merch store, link is in the description. We have Tesla Bot t-shirts, the Tesla meme t-shirt, success is a possible outcome, 4680 battery cells. All of that stuff is on t-shirts, mugs, tumblers, and on and on. So check it out. And finally, don't forget we are both Tesla and Amazon affiliates. If you look in the description, you can see how going shopping for a solar roof, a power wall, or anything on Amazon helps out the channel. In the meantime, I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.